Today, I want to talk about the power of forgiveness and how we need to forgive in order to grow and evolve as people and heal the parts of us that are still hurt from the past. Because without forgiveness, whether it's for ourselves or others, we hold on to the past, which stunts our growth and keeps us in the past rather than living in the present and moving into the future. So, in a little bit, we're going to dive into how to forgive ourselves and how to forgive others. But first, I want to go over the basics of what forgiveness is and how it can help you heal and why there's a benefit to learn the skill of forgiveness. A lot of people think they can't forgive people because what they did was so horrible. I think where people miss the point is that forgiveness isn't about anybody but yourself, and it's about who you are inside of your heart. Forgiveness is about giving yourself freedom to let go of the pain that you've experienced and to forgive others for being, far from perfect. Because when people hurt us, even if they're unaware, even if they did it intentionally, forgiving them allows you to move forward. And it's not about them. Forgiving somebody else doesn't give them anything. Even if they're seeking that forgiveness, they still are seeking that external validation because internally they're in pain. So it doesn't heal anything in them. All it does is heal something in you. When we don't forgive others, eventually we get into a place where we can't forgive ourselves. And when we can't forgive ourselves, we can't grow and evolve because it's too hard to look to where we're not doing well without shame, thinking that something's wrong with us because we're not doing something correctly. Because a big part of failing is learning how to forgive yourself and give yourself grace. First thing we have to keep in mind is forgiveness is not condoning, forgetting, or reopening trust with somebody. It is releasing the emotional impact and grip that has on the wound that you're experiencing. When you forgive somebody, that doesn't mean that you allow them back into your life, but it means that you've let go of the resentment that has caused you so much pain. A lot of the time when you're sitting in your room or you're sitting wherever, you're going to have these flashbacks of situations when you haven't forgiven somebody or yourself, where you're replaying the emotional experience in your mind and you get emotionally charged and you're still holding on to that pain and that experience because you haven't let go and forgiven that person. The definition of forgiving is to stop feeling angry or resentful towards someone. It's not about them. It's about your own feelings that you have inside of yourself, the way that you are seeing the world through your heart. And something that you have to keep in mind is that when people wrong you or they hurt you, whether it's intentional or not, the person that you are is in your control. Something that I used to say to myself a lot because I grew up in an abusive home. I experienced a lot of pain and suffering in my life. And something that I always had to keep in mind whenever I experienced some type of betrayal or some type of inadequacy in the way that a relationship was fundamentally working with me is that just because other people behave a certain way, I'm not going to change who I am. I'm not going to change the way I view the world and the way my heart experiences the world, because that's a beautiful thing about life, is feeling the way life is. So when you allow that anger and resentment to build up inside of you, then you're changing who you are because others have caused you pain. So not only have they caused you pain, but now they're able to sculpt and shut off the parts of you that make life so beautiful. If we release that emotional grip on the wound and we forgive those people, then we're able to move into the next experiences that we have, understanding what we learned from that experience, being able to reflect, being able to forgive ourselves for going through the experience, because maybe there was something that we missed, and move into the next experience knowing how we can be better and how to avoid these types of experiences before they get to that point where they can become damaging. Science proves that forgiveness lowers stress, inflammation, and can help you improve your sleep quality as well. So those are just a few benefits. If you're struggling with inflammation, stress, or sleep quality, try walking through the list of grievances that you have and just repeating to yourself that you forgive them until you actually feel it. Because I'll tell you something, it's not it's not going to happen overnight, but the more that you say it, the more that you practice it, the easier it will become. The reason this is the gateway to healing is because resentment is the equivalent to subconscious tension. When you are subconsciously in tension constantly, your stress levels rise. It also keeps you emotionally tied to the past, which prevents you from moving into the future. And forgiveness is cutting that energy from being siphoned out of your body and giving yourself that energy back. When you start to try to relearn how to trust yourself after going through a negative experience, maybe you were in like a toxic relationship, if you don't forgive yourself for ending up in that experience, you won't be able to trust yourself again because you're still stuck on the idea that you didn't trust yourself in the right way, that you made a mistake. So how can you move forward trusting yourself if you're still stuck on reprimanding yourself for past experiences where you simply failed? That's why shame is tied to a lack of forgiveness, because instead of giving yourself grace and not allowing yourself to be upset at yourself for being, a human being and making mistakes, you're ridiculing yourself, you're ridiculing others for making these mistakes instead of letting go and letting yourself be free from the pain that you've been captive in. When you're in this state of being, you can't experience peace. And when you heal, peace is the goal. You want to feel peace in every situation that you're in. You want to get to a point where you're in adversity and you feel peace. Like today, I broke a couple of things, with tariffs going up, the price of things going up, not having like a sustainable income right now. I don't really want to be buying things that I already have. And I broke something because I made a mistake. And I have to forgive myself for being so silly and not paying attention and let it go and feel peace in that moment. Because if I am going to hold on to the adversity inside of myself and ridicule myself for making that mistake, then I can't feel peace even though I'm facing adversity in that moment. True peace is being in the middle of chaos and knowing that everything's going to be fine because you trust yourself, because you forgive yourself for the mistakes that you make, and because you're willing to learn from those mistakes, which you can't do unless you forgive yourself or others. So this is interchangeable. I think starting with yourself is the best way. But as you start with yourself, forgiving others kind of becomes second nature. That's because forgiving yourself is often harder because we are our own worst critic. I mean, every time I make a mistake, the first thing that I jump to is the narrative that there's something wrong with me, that I'm broken. Why are you so stupid? How many times have you done this? And a part of that is ingrained because of the way society has been cultivated. But the reality is that internalized guilt and shame and regret comes from just not forgiving myself and moving on, especially if there were things in the past that I didn't forgive myself for and then it happens again. It's kind of like this buildup of that animosity inside of myself. And when you have that harsh inner voice, or you're avoiding your past and you have a difficulty with receiving love and new opportunities, that typically means that you haven't learned how to fully forgive yourself for all the things that you go through. Some of the phrases, other than the ones that I already mentioned, that you can use to notice if you're somebody who hasn't forgiven themselves are examples like, I can't believe I stayed in that toxic relationship for so long. I failed that opportunity and I don't trust myself now. I made a mistake doing X, Y, and Z. So these things stem from not trusting the decisions that you made. I've been in toxic relationships for too long. I have. But at the time, I had to go through that process because I had to learn from the process. And I forgive myself for that. I forgive myself for not knowing any better. But because I forgive myself and I don't condemn myself and shame myself because I stayed longer than most people should and it did negatively impact me, I've learned the warning signs. I've reflected. I've grown. I've been able to humble myself and know that I'm not perfect. And sometimes I get tricked. Sometimes I get taken advantage of. And that's okay. But what I can do is I can forgive myself for being somebody who didn't see those things, and I can look and understand where I went wrong so that way I can implement solutions in the future. And there's no shame in going through adversity or going through relationships where you didn't make the right decision. The only time you should be concerned is if you're not willing to give yourself the same grace that you would give a friend or others, and also giving yourself the same grace to know that if you would have known better, you would have done something different, because we don't know until we go through it and we learn and grow. So how can you start forgiving yourself and working on the areas where you have these gaps? The first thing that you need to do is you need to name it. You need to understand what's going on. So grab a journal and write down exactly what's happening, the emotion that you're feeling and the action that took place. I'm really mad at myself in the way that I treated my friend. I'm really mad that I made a mistake and dropped water on my scale where I measure my food when I'm in a cut. And then on the next line, what you're going to do is you're going to separate your identity from the behavior. Just because you made a mistake doesn't mean you are a mistake. That's something that took me a while. But you made a mistake. You did something. You aren't the mistake. You just made a mistake. This is not your identity. It's just a behavior. After that, you're going to practice self-compassion. So you're going to write down and rephrase what you first said and say it in a way that you would say it to like a child or a very close friend. So for example, with the I'm mad at myself for how I treated my friend. I should have treated my friend better, and I'm sorry for that. And I'm happy that I can learn from this experience and moving forward be better. It's okay that I made a mistake because at least I've learned and grown from it. I forgive myself for not knowing better, but moving forward, I will implement new solutions. And say it however you want. When I was like 5 years old, I was talking to myself like I was a CEO of a corporation for some reason. So for me, corporate ease works. Make sure you phrase it in a way that makes sense and speaks to your inner child. If there's something that is very difficult for you to forgive, you can write a forgiveness letter about the situation to yourself. I did this when I left my toxic relationship in 2020. I wrote a long email about it. I mean, I even wrote one to him. I didn't send it to him, but I wrote one to him about, how hurt I was and how I forgave him, even though I was so hurt. And then I wrote one to myself and I said, I forgive myself for allowing myself to be treated in this way. I forgive myself for not trusting my gut. I forgive myself for giving up on myself for the external validation of somebody else. And I went through the list of every emotion that I felt, but I had to identify these emotions first before I could write that letter. And then at the end of it, I released it and I said, I release this guilt and I'm choosing to grow from this and I will never put myself in this situation again. And I felt this physical release when I did this. If you don't feel that physical release when you're doing this, you can write a letter on a piece of paper, tear it up, burn it. Safely. You can say out loud, I release this physically. You can pray. You can journal and write it out over and over and over again until it happens. I used to do that as a kid. Like there were things that like I didn't believe about myself because I grew up in such an abusive home. I had no self-confidence or self-worth ever since I had a high self-confidence, self-worth. And then as I started to go through puberty, that's when everything kind of took a hit because of the dynamic that I was in. And I had to teach myself how to think about myself because the external world around me, I knew was not treating me in the way that I should be treated. I had this like innate knowing that it was wrong. And so I would write it out over and over and over again until I believed it. And eventually I believed those things. So you can do that when you're trying to release it. You can say, I release this physically. I forgive myself. I release the pain that I'm experiencing. I release the shame that I feel. And you have to remember, this is going to be something that's layered. It's not just going to be a one and done time that you have to do this. You're going to have to do this over and over and over again. I've probably forgiven myself 490 before it really hit. I'm talking over and over and over again. But the beauty is as you go through this process and you start to release this and you start to forgive yourself for the shame and the feeling that you feel, you will start to feel that in your body and you'll start to look at the world differently. So that way when you're learning to trust yourself and you fail, you look at the failure and you're not emotionally charged by it. It's not an additional layer of feeling that shame, right? It's not this additional layer where you're assigning, morality to words because you're so scared of how words could trigger you, because the core issue is that you haven't forgiven yourself for the failures that you've experienced in life. You're holding on to that shame. So the more you can forgive yourself for those things, the faster you'll be able to move through the world without feeling triggered in every corner that you go in. Now that you've learned how to forgive yourself, forgiving others is the next step, because I think it's a lot easier to start with yourself because forgiving yourself is much harder than forgiving others. It takes more emotional labor to rewire the way that you view yourself. And the way we view ourselves is how we treat others. So if I believe I don't deserve forgiveness, why would I give forgiveness to others? But as you develop that skill inside of you and you learn how to forgive and you soften your heart and you allow yourself to be the most authentic version of yourself, which we are all people who have soft hearts at the core of us. Like all of us were born children and we were all innocent at one point and the world has hardened us. So when we learn how to forgive ourselves and we learn how to forgive others, we allow ourselves to experience the world through that lens of innocence again within our heart. Even though we're shielded and we've learned lessons, we're still able to tap into that raw, authentic emotion of feeling joy and happiness in the smallest moments again. So as you move into forgiving others, a way that I like to think about this, because sometimes it's hard to forgive others. I had to forgive my abusive mom over and over and over again. And she doesn't even think she did anything wrong at all. She makes up lies. She tells people lies. She smeared my name. I was a child and she told everyone all these things that doesn't even make sense. And I had to forgive her. And the way that I was able to do this is, and the way a lot of people are able to do this is, you don't want to, the way I thought about it is if I hold on to this anger, I'm giving her power over me still. Like, I've escaped. I'm away from these people. I got away. I survived. I made it out. I'm not around them anymore. But the more I'm angered by them, the more I'm emotionally responded to them, the more power they have over me, the more power they control over my ability to feel safe and peaceful. So why would I want to hold on to that anger? And then I started thinking about it like, I feel sorry for these people. I genuinely feel sorry for these people. Like, I can't imagine what it's like to be somebody like that. Imagine the way you must think and the things that you must have experienced and the way you're so unwilling to forgive yourself that you go to these great lengths to hurt others. How could I not forgive you? How could I not feel bad for you? Not in a pity way, but in a way that allows me to see them as, a human, as a hurt child, because that's really what it is. Now, it doesn't mean that you reconcile with them, but it does mean that you're reclaiming your emotional control over the way that they made you feel and the way that they triggered you. This forgiveness is for you. It's not for them. When you start this process of forgiving others, you have to acknowledge the real impact. Don't minimize what happened. Write down what happened. I have so many journals of all of the things my mother did to me. It's really hard. I can't even read them now. But allowing myself to read through like my poetry and my writings about it, it allowed me to understand the reality of it and to remember the pain that I experienced and to see the impact that it truly made, because for a long time I wasn't sure because I was so young. I mean, it's just a very confusing situation. And when I wrote this down, I was able to fully accept the reality of which my life was. And you need to be able to feel the emotions fully, because when you feel the emotions fully, you process the emotion. And a lot of the time when we haven't forgiven people, the issue is that we are restraining ourselves from feeling the emotions. We are suffocating ourselves with unfelt emotions that harden our hearts and make it almost impossible for us to feel okay inside, because think about all the energy that you're trying to contain. Even if, people say like, oh, well, I haven't cried in like 10 years. It's like, that's because you're so overwhelmed with emotions. Your body is in a mode that won't allow you to move through your emotions. Like, that's not a good thing. Like, you need to feel your emotions to process them and let them go. And I know we live in a world where people think emotions are icky or you're weak for feeling your emotions. And I would argue it's weak to not feel your emotions, because facing your emotions means it takes strength to face yourself in the mirror. It takes strength to be weak in a world that makes you feel like weakness is not okay. You're facing reality, and experiencing that is how you offload those emotions. If someone's scared to feel their emotions, that means that they're a coward of themselves, and that's something that they have to overcome. So when you go into this, know that when you're facing your emotions, you are strong for that. It's the bravest thing you can do, because the emotional landscape of these types of situations that you've been in where you can't even forgive somebody really do impact you and they hurt you. So give your space to feel that anger, that sadness, the grief. And then as you feel those emotions, shift that focus and ask yourself, is holding this emotion inside of me serving me, or is it costing me? I've been in situations where holding onto my emotions did serve me. I had to. I didn't have the luxury or the time or the privilege to process my emotions. And that's why I held on to them for so long. And sometimes people are in that situation, because to be in a situation where you can face your emotions because of the heavy burden that it can be to experience your emotions, which is why I'm saying like you have to be strong to be able to do this, is very difficult. You have to make sure that you have your finances in check, you have safety and security in your life, because you don't know what's going to happen sometimes if you feel your emotions. I mean, I felt my emotions, and then for like a year, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to process so much. I have to process, so no wonder I dissociated for so long. But then I realized it was costing me my health. I was under a lot of stress and duress, and I had to move into this position where I had to accept the reality that it was time to feel it and let go. Set boundaries as you do this, whether it's with the other people involved or yourself. Remember, forgiveness doesn't mean people are allowed back into your life if you don't want them to be. If you haven't seen a change in them, if they're doing the same things that they did before to hurt you, no, you don't have to let them back in. If they've radically changed their life and you haven't seen them in a couple years and their heart is completely different, and you can see that in the way that they're moving over a period of time, then sure, you could let them back in. I don't think people are incapable of changing. I've changed so many times in my own life. Of course, other people have changed, but you don't have to let somebody in just because you forgive them. And you don't even have to tell somebody you forgive them. You don't have to say it to them. You just need to say it to yourself. It depends on how you want to move through this. But forgiveness is about how you feel about the situation. So if you don't want to talk to somebody, you can write it down. I forgive them and I will never let myself go through this again. And then after you write down those statements or you say those statements to them, try to empathize with why they would be that way. Try to empathize and understand why they did something. Don't excuse it. It's not an excuse because everyone is responsible for their behavior and their actions, but understanding why can give you clarity, because not only does that give you clarity of how maybe you have hurt others, because we are all human, but it gives you clarity as the reason why something happened has really nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. So try to understand, like write down, why do you think this happened based on what you know about this person? Why would someone behave this way? And then you can write a letter if you want. I did that with my ex-boyfriend. Say it out loud, have a bonfire. I mean, I've done a lot of things. Once I had my first boyfriend, he betrayed me and cheated on me and then married my best friend. And I forgive them. But I had this teddy bear. And in order to let go of the pain I felt inside of me, I knew I had to destroy the teddy bear. So I quite literally destroyed this teddy bear. Be creative in the way that you think I would do that. And I opened it up and I stuffed all these things that he gave me inside of it and threw it in the trash. And I felt this immediate release. And I was happy, you know. I knew we weren't the right people for each other, obviously, because I would never do those things and I'm not somebody like that, so we're not a match. And I was happy that he could find somebody who's a better match for him, because at the end of the day, that's his own pierogi. But going through that process of destroying that item that he had given me and stuffing everything in it and then throwing it away was a way for me to really release the pain that I had inside of me and put it behind me and move on. And as I threw it into the trash can, I said, I forgive you for this. So after you've learned how to forgive yourself and you've learned how to forgive others, you're going to start feeling lighter, clearer, and more emotionally regulated. Your triggers are going to become more minimal, especially towards those that you've forgiven or the memory of them. And your relationship with yourself and others will improve. You will have to do this over and over again. Just like I tell the story of my ex-boyfriend betraying me, I say immediately after, I forgive them, because I want to remind myself I do forgive them. It doesn't mean it didn't hurt. It doesn't excuse what they did, but I do forgive them. And I can understand why they did that. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but that's who they are. And as you do this, after you forgive certain people that have harmed you, you're going to notice that you're not falling into the same patterns that you had fallen into before. A lot of people, when they forgive their abusive parents, they will realize that they're not attracting emotionally unavailable partners anymore. When you forgive yourself, you'll stop feeling like you're a failure or like you've done something wrong. And you have to remember that forgiveness isn't letting anyone off the hook. It's just unhooking yourself from the pain that you feel inside of you. And without forgiveness, you can't heal. So if you want to heal, you want to learn how to trust yourself, you want to improve your life, and you want to live the life that you've always been meant to live, and you want to feel like the person that you were when you were younger and you were full of hope, understanding, and joy and passion, the forgiveness that you give to others and yourself throughout your lifetime will allow you to reopen that innocent part of you and to feel alive again. I'll post these prompts on my Substack. Make sure that you join the Evolution Revolution. That way you can get more insights, prompts, or journaling to help you heal, learn how to trust yourself, create plans for your life, and become the best version of yourself. And if you like understanding the truth behind the trends, make sure that you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, guys. We'll see you guys next time.